the federal courthouse stood imposing against the gray November sky. Its limestone facade, a physical manifestation of the justice system's intended gravitas. Inside courtroom 5A, the air carried the distinct scent of polished wood and tension. An atmosphere charged with the competing energies of power, privilege, and accountability. The temperature remained at a precise 68 degrees, though to many present it felt considerably colder as they witnessed the unmistakable shift in judicial demeanor. That would soon escalate into one of the most remarkable moments in recent legal history. Sean Diddy Combs occupied his designated place at the defense table. His Tom Ford suit impeccably tailored, yet somehow appearing less commanding than it had during the trial's opening days. His normally confident posture had subtly altered over the 11 days of proceedings thus far, a change so incremental that only those watching closely would have noticed. Today, however, his shoulders carried a new tension. His jaw set in a position that suggested mounting concern beneath the practiced public mask. Beside him sat his legal team, a carefully assembled collection of the nation's most expensive legal talent. Their combined hourly rate exceeding what most Americans earn. In a month, lead counsel Martin Shaw, known for navigating wealthy clients through seemingly impossible legal challenges, leaned toward his client, whispering something that caused Diddy's expression to shift momentarily before resetting to careful neutrality. The brief flash of emotion, something that resembled frustration or perhaps disbelief, did not go unnoticed by Judge Victoria Harlow. At 62. Judge Harlow had spent 23 years on the federal bench, her reputation built on a foundation of meticulous attention to legal detail and an absolute indifference to the status of those who appeared before her. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob, her black robe worn without adornment, her only concession to personal style, a pair of rectangular reading glasses that magnified the intensity of her already penetrating gaze. Throughout her career, she had presided over cases involving politicians, celebrities, and business titans with the same unflinching commitment to equal application of the law that she brought to cases involving defendants without wealth or influence. The gallery behind a bar of the court presented its own carefully calibrated ecosystem. The first 2 rows had been occupied since the trial's beginning by an evolving rotation of music industry executives, celebrities, and associates whose presence was clearly intended to communicate ongoing support for the defendant. Behind them sat a mix of family members, journalists from major outlets, and court observers who had secured the coveted passes to witness what had become the most closely watched trial of the year. The back row, reserved for general public access through a daily lottery system, contained a cross-section of curious citizens whose expressions ranged from stark fascination to critical assessment. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chun stood at the prosecution table reviewing documents with focused intensity. Her navy suit deliberately understated, her demeanor projecting quiet confidence rather than the theatrical flourishes that characterized some of her colleagues in high-profile cases. At 45, she had built her reputation prosecuting complex financial crimes, developing a particular expertise in cases where wealth and privilege had previously insulated defendants from accountability. Her team, smaller but notably more diverse than the defense's, worked with coordinated efficiency, their movements suggesting a group accustomed to confronting legal opponents with substantially greater resources. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, ready to document every word of the proceedings for the official record. Court officers maintained strategic positions around the perimeter of the room, their experienced eyes continuously scanning for any disruption to the proceedings. A sketch artist in the front corner captured the scene with swift, precise strokes, creating the visual record that would accompany news reports in the absence of cameras in the federal courtroom. Judge Harlow reviewed documents on the bench before her, occasionally making annotations with a silver fountain pen. When she looked up, her gaze swept across the courtroom in a deliberate assessment that seemed to take in everything. The slight shift in the defendant's demeanor, the structured performance of support in the gallery, the careful positioning of the legal teams. Her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts, maintaining the judicial neutrality that had made her both respected and feared among attorneys who appeared before her. "We will continue with the prosecution's examination of the witness," she stated, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom without requiring amplification. She turned toward the witness stand where James Morrison, former financial officer for one of Diddy's companies, sat with a slightly hunched posture of someone uncomfortable with public attention. "Mr. Morrison, I'll remind you that you remain under oath." As Chun rose to resume her questioning, no one in the courtroom, not the assembled journalists, not the experienced legal teams, not even the defendant himself anticipated how dramatically the day's proceedings were about to deviate from the carefully managed script that had characterized the trial thus far. The tension that had been building incrementally over days of testimony was about to find its catalyst, transforming a methodical legal proceeding into a moment that would reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls. The case against Shah Diddy. Combs had begun 18 months earlier with what initially appeared to be routine regulatory inquiries into his diverse business operations. What started his questions about potential tax discrepancies gradually expanded as investigators uncovered patterns that suggested more significant legal concerns. By the time the grand jury issued its indictment, the charges included money laundering, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and racketeering allegations that carried potential sentences totaling decades in federal prison. Throughout his 30-year career, Diddy had carefully cultivated an image that transcended his music industry beginnings. He had transformed himself from producer to performer to entrepreneur, building a business empire that included fashion lines, a spirits brand, media companies, and various investment ventures. His personal brand had been built on a foundation of unapologetic ambition and visible success. A narrative that had made him not just wealthy but influential across multiple spheres of American culture. The legal team he assembled to counter the federal charges reflected both his resources and his approach to challenges. Martin Shaw, whose client list included financial industry executives, technology billionaires, and international business figures, led a defense strategy built around two core arguments: that the prosecution's case represented overreach based on misinterpretation of complex business structures, and that Diddy's success had made him a target for scrutiny that other business leaders might have avoided. The early phases of the trial had proceeded with a choreographed precision typical of high-profile federal cases. Jury selection had been exhaustive, with both sides exercising their challenges strategically to shape a panel they believed might be receptive to their narratives. Opening statements had established the competing frameworks through which each side wanted the evidence interpreted. The prosecution portraying a pattern of deliberate legal violations protected by wealth and influence. The defense suggesting legitimate business complexities being criminalized through prosecutorial misunderstanding and overreach. The relationship between Diddy and Judge Harlow had been professional but noticeably tense from the earliest trial hearings. His legal team had filed numerous motions seeking preferential treatment regarding court appearances and schedule accommodations, citing his business commitments and public obligations. Judge Harlow had rejected these requests with increasingly pointed language, making it clear that her courtroom operated according to legal principles rather than the defendant's convenience. This tension had remained largely beneath the surface during the trial's opening days. Expressed primarily through Judge Harlow's precise enforcement of procedural rules and her occasional sharp reminders to the defense team about courtroom protocol. When Shaw had attempted to introduce arguments that strayed beyond the established evidentiary boundaries, her interventions had been swift and unambiguous, though still within the normal parameters of judicial management. The prosecution's case had been methodically constructed, focusing on documentary evidence rather than potentially unreliable witness testimony. Financial records, communication logs, and the defendant's own social media history had been presented in a carefully structured narrative that suggested systematic legal violations rather than isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Chun's examination style had been notably understated, allowing the evidence rather than rhetorical flourishes to shape the jury's impressions. The current witness, James Morrison, represented a potentially significant addition to this documentary foundation. As former financial officer for Combs Enterprises, he had direct knowledge of the business operations that form the core of the prosecution's case. His testimony had begun the previous day with establishing background and context. But today's session promised to address specific transactions that the prosecution had highlighted in their opening statement as evidence of money laundering and ID tax evasion. The defense strategy toward Morrison had been evident from there. earliest interactions to characterize him as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge rather than justice. During pre-trial publicity, anonymous sources close to the defense had suggested Morrison had been terminated for incompetence and had subsequently attempted to extort payment for his silence. These allegations, while never formally introduced in court, had circulated widely in media coverage, potentially influencing public perception. If not, it's the carefully insulated jury. The gallery reflected the high stakes of the proceedings. Entertainment industry publications had assigned their most experienced legal reporters to provide daily coverage. Major news networks maintained a constant presence with correspondents delivering updates during every recess. Social media platforms were flooded with competing hashtags supporting either Diddy's innocence or the prosecution's pursuit of accountability. The online conversation often divided along lines that revealed deeper cultural tensions about wealth, race, and justice in America. As Chen resumed her questioning of Morrison, the atmosphere in the courtroom carried the accumulated weight of these contextual elements. The witness's testimony had reached a pivotal point. Transitioning from general business practices to specific transactions that the prosecution alleged demonstrated criminal intent, the defense team appeared increasingly alert, their note-taking more urgent, their whispered conferences more frequent as Morrison began describing financial movements between domestic and international accounts controlled by the defendant's various business entities. Diddy himself maintained the composed exterior that had characterized his public persona throughout his career. Though close observers noted subtle indicators of increased tension, the occasional tightening of his jaw, the slightly too frequent adjustment of his tie, the way his eyes now tracked between the witness and the jury rather than maintaining the confident forward gaze he had displayed during earlier testimony. It was against this backdrop, the carefully constructed legal narratives, the competing public relations efforts, the simmering tension between judicial authority and celebrity expectation that the catalyst for the day's dramatic confrontation would emerge, transforming what had been a methodically managed legal proceeding into something far more revealing about the intersection of wealth, power, and accountability in the American justice system. Mr. Dr. Morrison Chen continued, Iran, maintaining its professional neutrality despite the increasing significance of the testimony. Could you explain the purpose of the offshore account established in the Cayman Islands under the corporate designation Innovative Creative Enterprises as you understood it during your employment with Mr. Combs' organization? Morrison shifted slightly in the witness chair, his discomfort with public speaking evident though his voice remained steady. That account was described internally as a strategic tax management vehicle. In practice, it received transfers from domestic accounts before those funds would have triggered certain reporting requirements, then redistributed those funds through a series of international transactions before returning them to domestic accounts under different corporate designations. And who directed the establishment of this account structure? Chen asked. Mr. Combs personally approved the structure after it was presented by the external consulting firm Meridian Partners. He was quite specific about maintaining personal signing authority rather than delegating it to the financial team, which was unusual compared to our standard procedures for other accounts. At the defense table, Shaw straightened, his pen hovering above his legal pad. Beside him, Diddy leaned forward slightly, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly as Morrison's testimony directly connected him to the financial structures at issue. A junior member of the defense team slid a note towards Shaw, who glanced at it briefly before returning his attention to the witness. And what was your understanding of the legality of these arrangements? Chen continued before Morrison. Kudansa Shaw rose to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Calls for a legal conclusion from a witness who lacks expertise to make such determinations. Judge Harlow considered the objection momentarily. The witness may testify to his understanding as a financial professional without offering definitive legal conclusions. The objection is overruled. The witness may answer. Morrison nodded his understanding of the distinction. As CFO, I raised concerns about these structures on 3 separate occasions. I documented these concerns in emails to Mr. Combs and the legal team, specifically noting that the rapid movement of funds appeared designed to circumvent reporting thresholds rather than serve legitimate business purposes. These concerns were dismissed. And I was told, and I'm quoting directly from the response I received, these structures were created by people who are paid very well to know exactly where the lines are and how to stay just on the right side of them. Chen approached the evidence table and lifted a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence prosecution Exhibit 47, which contains the email correspondence Mr. Morrison has just referenced. As the document was distributed to the judge, jury, and defense team, Shaw leaned toward Diddy, whispering urgently. Whatever response Diddy gave appeared to dissatisfy his attorney, whose expression tightened momentarily before he regained his professional composure. This brief exchange did not escape Judge Harlow's notice, though she made no comment as she reviewed the document before her. Mr. Morrison, Chen continued, after the exhibit had been formally entered into evidence, what actions, if any, did Mr. Combs take in response to your documented concerns? 2 weeks after my third email, my access to the offshore account documentation was restricted. When I inquired about this change, I was informed that Mr. Combs had decided to create a more streamlined reporting structure that removed those accounts from my direct oversight. I continued to see the transfers in and out of our domestic accounts, but I no longer had visibility into the intermediate transactions occurring offshore. At the defense table, the shift in dynamics was becoming increasingly apparent to courtroom observers. Diddy's composed exterior showed signs of strain as the testimony directly connected him to decisions that appeared designed to conceal financial activities from his own chief financial officer. His hand moved to his water glass, the slight tremor visible to those seated closest to the defense table. Shaw's posture had become more rigid, his note-taking more urgent. His whispered conferences with junior attorneys more frequent. Chen displayed a series of financial transfers on the courtroom screens. The transactions highlighted in red showing movements between accounts just below regulatory reporting thresholds. Mr. Morrison, are these the transfers you were referring to in your earlier testimony? Yes, these represent just 1 month of activity. The pattern repeated consistently throughout my tenure with the amounts calibrated to remain below reporting requirements while maximizing the total funds moved through the system and based on your professional experience. Did these transfers serve legitimate business purposes? Shaw rose again. Objection, Your Honor, again calls for speculation beyond the witness's expertise. Your Honor, Chen countered before Judge Harlow could rule. Mr. Morrison was the chief financial officer with responsibility for ensuring legitimate business documentation for all transactions. Professional assessment of whether these transfers served documented business purposes falls squarely within his expertise. Judge Harlow nodded. The objection is overruled. The witness may answer regarding the business purpose documentation without offering legal conclusions about the transfers themselves. Morrison straightened slightly in his chair, his professional confidence more evident when discussing technical matters within his expertise. No, they did not serve documented legitimate business purposes. When I requested supporting documentation for audit preparation, I was provided with consulting agreements and service contracts that in my professional judgment appeared to be created after the fact to justify the transfers. The dates, service descriptions, and payment schedules did not align with our actual business operations during the relevant periods. As Chen prepared to continue her questioning, Shaw rose again. Your Honor, I request a brief sidebar to address an urgent matter related to this testimony. Judge Harlow considered the request momentarily before nodding. Counsel may approach. As the attorneys moved toward the bench, the courtroom remained silent, though the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. At the defense table, Diddy maintained his composed exterior, though his eyes now focused intently on the whispered conference occurring before the judge. In the gallery, journalists leaned forward slightly, sensing that a significant moment in the proceedings might be developing. The sidebar conference, though conducted in hushed tones, showed clear signs of intensity. Shaw's gestures, while restrained by courtroom protocol, suggested urgency. Chen's posture remained calm but firm, her occasional headshake indicating disagreement with whatever arguments Shaw was presenting. Judge Harlow listened with the impassive expression that had characterized her judicial demeanor, offering minimal responses that provided no indication of her leanings. After approximately 3 minutes, she made a dismissive gesture that clearly ended the conference. As the attorneys returned to their respective positions, Shaw's expression suggested the exchange had not gone in his favor. He leaned toward Diddy, whispering something that caused a momentary flash of what appeared to be alarm before the defendant reset his features to careful neutrality. "The prosecution may continue," Judge Harlow stated, her tone unchanged despite the tension evident in Shaw's demeanor. Chen returned to her position and prepared to resume questioning what happened next. The catalyst that would transform the methodical proceedings into something far more revealing occurred so swiftly that many in the courtroom would later card it as a sudden rupture in the carefully maintained facade of procedural normalcy as Morrison began describing specific offshore transactions that directly implicated Diddy in potential criminal activity. The defendant leaned toward Shaw and whispered something with unusual animation. Shaw placed a restraining hand on his client's arm and shook his head in clear warning. Diddy persisted, his whisper becoming just audible enough that those nearest the defense table could hear. Fragments suggesting he wanted certain lines of questioning blocked or the witness's credibility attacked more aggressively. Judge Harlow, whose attention to courtroom dynamics was legendary among attorneys who had appeared before her, did not miss this exchange. Her expression shifted subtly, not dramatically enough to draw immediate attention, but noticeably to those accustomed to reading her carefully controlled judicial demeanor. She allowed the testimony to continue for several more minutes before intervening in a manner that would permanently alter the trajectory of the proceedings. "Ms. Chen," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through Morrison's detailed explanation of transaction patterns. "Please pause your questioning for a moment." She turned her attention to the defense table, her gaze focusing with laser precision on the defendant. "Mr. Combs, do you have something you wish to share with this court?" The question, directed not to his attorney, but to Diddy himself, created an immediate ripple effect through the courtroom. Shaw straightened, evident surprise. Clearly unprepared for the judge's direct address to his client outside the normal protocols of testimony, Diddy himself appeared momentarily frozen, caught between the instinct to respond directly and the legal training that had emphasized allowing his attorneys to speak for him in court. "No, Your Honor," he finally responded, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness that had characterized his public speaking throughout his career. "I was simply consulting with my attorney." Judge Harlow's expression remained impassive, but something in her eyes had changed, a sharpening of focus that experienced courtroom observers recognized as a warning sign indeed. "And would this consultation perhaps relate to your apparent dissatisfaction with your attorney's handling of this witness?" The question, precise, direct, and uncomfortably perceptive, landed with palpable impact. In the gallery, several journalists straightened in their seats, recognizing that the exchange had moved beyond normal judicial management of proceedings. At the prosecution table, Chen remained carefully neutral, though the slightest raise of an eyebrow betrayed her recognition of the unusual development. "I did," began, then paused, visibly recalibrating his response. "I have complete confidence in my legal representation, Your Honor." "I see," Judge Harlow replied, her tone making it clear she saw considerably more than the defendant might wish. "Then perhaps you could explain why you appear to be directing your attorney on how to proceed, rather than allowing him to exercise the normal subtle sounds of movement and breathing seemingly suspended as all attention focused on the escalating confrontation." Diddy's right hand had moved to the edge of the defense table, his fingers pressing against the wood with enough force that his knuckles had widened slightly. A small physical tell that revealed the mounting tension beneath his still controlled exterior. "Your Honor," he began, his voice maintaining its practiced smoothness, though attentive observers might have detected a slight strain at its edges. "I apologize if my consultation with my attorney was disruptive to the proceedings. That was certainly not my intention." The apology, professionally delivered and carefully worded, might have sufficed in other contexts where Diddy's charm and composure had successfully navigated difficult situations throughout his career. Judge Harlow, however, appeared unmoved by the practiced response. Mr. Combs, this is not about a momentary disruption. Her voice had taken on an edge that caused several experienced attorneys in the gallery to exchange glances, recognizing the warning signs of judicial patience reaching its limits. This is about a fundamental misunderstanding of your position in this courtroom. You are not the executive producer of these proceedings. You are not the director of this process. You are the defendant in a federal criminal trial, subject to the same rules, requirements, and restrictions as any other defendant who appears before this court. The directness of the statement, its unvarnished clarification of his status visibly impacted Diddy in a way that the technical legal proceedings had not. Something in his expression shifted, a momentary crack in the carefully maintained facade, revealing a flash of what might have been anger, or perhaps the more unfamiliar emotion of genuine uncertainty. For someone who had spent decades cultivating and projecting an image of unwavering confidence and control, this public redefinition of his position represented unfamiliar and clearly uncomfortable territory. Shaw, recognizing the potentially damaging direction of the exchange, made another attempt to redirect the focus. Your Honor, we fully understand and respect the court's authority and procedures. If there have been any actions that suggested otherwise, we sincerely, Mr. Shaw, Judge Harlow interrupted, her tone now carrying an unmistakable note of finality. Your client's understanding appears to be the issue at hand. She turned her full attention back to Diddy, her gaze direct and unwavering. Mr. Combs, let me be absolutely clear. In this courtroom, your wealth does not matter. Your celebrity does not matter. Your business empire does not matter. The only things that matter here are the evidence, the law, and the truth. Your money can't save you here. Your fame can't influence these proceedings. Your power holds no currency in this courtroom. A statement delivered with quiet intensity rather than theatrical volume landed with seismic force in the silent courtroom. Its power lay not in its delivery, but in its content, the explicit articulation of principles that were supposed to underpin the justice system, but which were rarely stated so directly in cases involving wealthy, powerful defendants. The reaction rippled through the courtroom like a physical wave, affecting different participants in different ways. At the defense table, Idy's transformation was the most visible. The composed exterior that had been showing incremental strain now displayed more significant fractures. His breathing pattern had changed, becoming slightly more rapid, though he clearly attempted to control it. The hand that had been pressing against the table edge now curled into a loose fist before he consciously relaxed it. Most revealing was his expression. The practiced mask of confidence momentarily replaced by something rarely seen on the face of one of music and business's most successful figures. Genuine uncertainty about how to respond. Shaw's reaction suggested both professional concern and strategic reassessment. His posture straightening as he recognized that the normal playbook for managing difficult courtroom moments would not suffice. In this situation, the junior defense attorneys exchanged glances that communicated shared recognition of the unprecedented nature of the confrontation unfolding before them. In the gallery, the impact registered in a spectrum of responses. Several journalists typed with increasing urgency on tablets and phones, recognizing the significant nature of what they were witnessing. The celebrities and business associates, who had maintained supportive presence throughout the trial, displayed varying degrees of discomfort, some shifting in their seats, while others maintained carefully neutral expressions that revealed nothing of their internal reactions. The prosecution team maintained professional composure, though Chun's slight adjustment in posture suggested recognition that the judicial intervention had altered the dynamics of the proceedings in ways that might impact her strategic approach to the remainder of the trial. The witness, Morrison, sat completely still in the witness box, his expression suggesting the uncomfortable recognition of someone who has unexpectedly found himself at the center of a significant courtroom confrontation. As the silence extended for several seconds longer than normal courtroom rhythm would dictate, the emotional temperature continued to escalate. What had begun as a routine examination of a financial witness had transformed into something far more revealing, a direct confrontation between judicial authority and the expectation of difference that often accompanied wealth and celebrity. The carefully maintained procedural facade had cracked, exposing the raw power dynamics that typically remained beneath the surface of high-profile trials. The stage was now set for the dramatic climax that would permanently alter the trajectory of the trial and perhaps the public perception of one of entertainment's most successful and carefully managed figures. Judge Harlow allowed the weight of her words to settle across the courtroom before continuing, her gaze remaining fixed on Diddy with unwavering intensity. "Mr. Combs, this court has observed your reactions throughout these proceedings, your apparent surprise when objections are overruled, your visible displeasure when testimony goes unchallenged, your frequent instructions to your legal team. These behaviors suggest a fundamental misconception about your position here." She leaned forward slightly, her next words measured and precise. "You are accustomed to environments where your word is final, where your displeasure results in immediate accommodation, where your status grants you exemption from rules that govern others. This courtroom is not such an environment." The directness of the assessment, its unapologetic deconstruction of the power dynamics that had shaped Diddy's professional life for decades, created a palpable shift in the courtroom atmosphere. In the gallery, several spectators exchanged glances that acknowledged the unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing. At the prosecution table, Sean remained perfectly still, her expression professionally neutral, though her complete